evening, travelers of the night, and welcome to Wolf Radio Live. I'm your host, Mr. Wolf, guiding you once again through the hidden corridors of the human mind. Tonight, we step beyond the veil into a world where perception bends, time dissolves, and the line between the real and the unreal begin to fade. A world whispered about for centuries through shamanic chants, sacred rituals, and late-night stories of visions that feel too real to dismiss. They call it the psychedelic realm, a frontier of consciousness where the soul becomes both the traveler and the terrain. Scientists call it neurochemistry, seekers call it awakening. But those who've been there know it's something far stranger. Our guest tonight, Linden Schaffer, has spent over 2 decades exploring this territory, not only as adventurer chasing the high, but as a guide helping others find meaning within the mystery. Through her work with the Reveal community, she has shown countless souls how to prepare, journey, and integrate safely, consciously, and with purpose. So tonight we ask the questions that linger long after the lights go out. What lives inside the psychedelic experience? What does it reveal about us, about reality itself? And are we truly discovering new dimensions of the mind, or simply remembering what we've always known? Settle in. Open your mind and keep your senses sharp, because what we will explore tonight isn't just about altered states. It's about waking up. This is Wolf Radio Live, and the journey begins now. Before we dive headlong into tonight's journey through the mind and the mysteries of consciousness, it's time, as always, to lift our heads and take a look at the strange skies above and the even stranger stories that unfold here below. The world, my friends, never sleeps, and neither do the shadows that move across it, from strange lights over the Pacific to whispers of ancient civilizations stirring beneath the sands, from cryptic signals echoing through the deep space to encounters so bizarre they blur the edge between science and superstition. It's been another week full of wonder, weirdness, and the wild unknown. So pour another cup of midnight coffee, dim the lights, and lean in close, because it's time once again for the Weekly Howl. These are the headlines the daylight tried to forget. Brazilian wheat field agroglyphs rise again. In the western Brazilian town of Apuacu, a perfectly formed crop circle or agroglyph appeared in a wheat field. Investigators found that plants were bent cleanly with no breakage or tire tracks, and dogs were barking that night. There were no lights or vehicles seen. The phenomenon in that region has been reoccurring since at least 2008. Glowing subsea orbs off U.S. coasts. Reports continue to surface of mysterious orbs and objects seen emerging from coastal waters and hovering above the ocean near major U.S. shorelines. Some witnesses say the objects transition between water and air with no visible propulsion system. A late-night jogger at Phil Hardberger Park in San Antonio, Texas, posted to Reddit his reported sighting of a creature resembling a 10-foot-plus tall wolf with an ominous big tail. Local responders speculated whether it was simply a bad stunt or something else lurking in the dark. U.S. military UAP collection goes undersea. The establishment of the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, or AARO, and other agencies is increasingly acknowledging that unidentified anomalous phenomenon involve both aerial and undersea domains. This shift raises questions about what lies beneath and whether unexplained craft are surfacing from deep waters. Fringe Science study, a UAP and economic links. A recent controversial research paper proposes a statistical correlation between regional economic conditions and the frequency of UAP sightings across the U.S., raising the notion that anomalies may cluster where financial stress is high. Digital archives of the weird are growing. Government and university archiving projects now preserving thousands of files on ghost sightings, cryptids, and UAP encounters previously overlooked as fringe. It signals that the institutional mindset may be shifting, according to Newsweek. Mysterious silent lights over Ireland. In Multiple counties, including Wexford, Cork, and Donegal, residents reported slow-moving luminous objects in the night sky, not meteorites nor satellites, and no official explanation yet. Some meteorologists offered rocket fuel dump theories, but many observers remain skeptical. Ancient footprints, modern mysteries. Archaeologists in an isolated desert region reveal faint, massive footprints near a recently ruined structure. Footprints far larger than any known human foot and resembling elongated boot prints of mythic scale. The research team is withholding coordinates pending investigation. Drone-style swarms turning into UFO narratives. Swarms of lights and small drone-like crafts have been reported over suburban zones, but some researchers argue the flight pattern, size, and coordination exceed drone capability descriptions, leading to renewed UFO speculation. Lost vessel surfaces off Alaska. A small fishing trawler off of the Alaskan coast reported capturing on sonar an object about 120 feet wide and 600 feet depth, motionless with no known military tag. Upon surfacing, there was no visible damage, but the crew reported everyone felt unsettled for days. New data plate reveals mysterious light bursts from 1950s sky surveys. Archival photography of sky survey plates from the 1950s has revealed more than 100,000 transient flashes of light, uncorrelated with known satellites or aircraft, appearing just before major nuclear tests. Researchers are calling for a modern reanalysis. Ancient underground cavern opens near Cambodia. A new entrance to a previously unknown cave system was found near an ancient temple complex, featuring carvings of winged humanoids and hemispherical depressions in the rocks, raising fresh questions about ancient mythology, ancient visit speculation, and lost civilizations. Cryptid creatures heard but not seen in Siberia taiga. Rangers in a remote process of clearing trees in Siberia's taiga reported hearing a low-frequency howl and the snapping of trees, but recorded devices failed to capture visuals. They believe it may be a large unknown predator or something else entirely. And there you have it, folks. The weekly howl. The world keeps spinning, and yet the strange keeps whispering. UFOs beneath the waves, echoes of giants in the earth. Lights in the night sky that refuse to name themselves. Maybe, just maybe, the universe is trying to tell us something. If we'd only listen. We're going to take a short break now. Let the static settle and the mind breathe for a moment. When we return, we'll be joined by Linden Schaffer, founder of the Reveal community, a pioneer in the wellness and psychedelic space. Together, we'll explore consciousness, healing, and the hidden potential inside every one of us. Stay with us. You're listening to Wolf Radio Live. The night is young and the mystery has only begun. Welcome back, travelers of the night. You've tuned in to Wolf Radio Live, and if you stayed with us through the break, you can feel it too. Something is in the air tonight. That quiet pull towards the unknown, the sense that there's more to this reality than what the daylight tells us. Tonight, we open the door to the unknown, the intersection of science, spirit, and self, where ancient wisdom meets modern discovery. Our world is changing fast, and as consciousness expands, more and more seekers are turned inward to explore not just the mind, but the mysteries that lie beyond it. And the center of that exploration is the growing movement of the psychedelic healing. My guest tonight is someone who walks that path with clarity and compassion, Linden Schaffer, founder of Reveal, a 3-time founder, award-winning wellness entrepreneur, and best-selling author with over 2 decades in the wellness and psychedelic space. She's guided countless individuals through preparation, integration, and transformation. Her work has been featured in Forbes and Fast Company, and she shared her message from stages at Google to psychedelic science. Tonight, we'll be peeling back the veil, exploring what it truly means to heal, to awaken, and to meet the self on the deepest level, from ancient plant medicines to modern neuroscience, from the shadows of the psyche to the light of awareness. So pour a cup of something warm, settle into the night, and open your mind, because we're about to uncover what we're about to uncover might just change the way you see reality itself. This is Wolf Radio Live, and tonight we go deep with Linden Schaffer. Linden, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me here.
Great to see you here. Great to have you here with us there, Linden. It looks like I've got something set kind of funny on the screen here, but I've got you in full swing now. You're expanded. Welcome in. I am ecstatic to have you here with us today.
Thank you. I can't wait to talk about all of this. I see you wore the right shirt and you played the right song. So let's get it going.
I sure try. I take this business seriously. I really do. When we have a subject matter like we have tonight, you've got to dress the part. You just have to. And definitely so. And besides, I've been dying to pull this one out of the wardrobe. For sure. So, Linden, before we dive into the deep end, I'd love to know what first drew you to the world of psychedelics and consciousness exploration?
Wow, this is a big question. We're getting started right away, huh? Going deep.
Well, just what got you? Yeah, what got you in? What got you in? I mean, I think I gave a pretty good introduction as to who you are. 3-time founder, which is amazing, and you're a public speaker on some very, very notable stages. Super happy about that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, it's great when I look back on my career, right? When you're in it, sometimes you don't realize what's happening or where it's going to take you, but it is nice to be able to reflect every now and again and realize how far you come. And for me, I would say my altered state and psychedelic journey started like many people as a teenager, just somebody who was looking to explore altered states. I was never someone who alcohol really agreed with me. And so cannabis back then, just like now, it's legal in many places, and it's probably one of the most widely available that people know about and people sort of start to experiment with. And so that was probably as a teenager, my first foray into this space. And as I entered my later teenage years, moved to New York City, where I lived for quite a long time. I was in the club scene in the 90s, and that's, again, recreationally, that's where a lot of this stuff started for me. And I was very fortunate that back then, we didn't have to worry so much about what the compound that we were using had in it. And so we weren't testing what we were doing. We just got really lucky. And I had a lot of fun. And what I didn't realize during that time is as I got older, things started to shift. And I started to notice how using these altered state compounds got me more in touch with myself, my emotions. I would have insights. And I started to think, oh, interesting. I wonder if these have more to them than just sort of the fun and recreational side. And yeah, that's kind of how it started, mistakenly, if you will. And my partner and I began using Molly in our relationship, sort of as couples therapy. And that was probably the very first intentional, we're going to take this compound, we're not going to be out, we're going to be at our house, we're going to dedicate the day to ourselves, and we're going to talk through this experience, deepen our experience of our relationship, bring up things that maybe it's harder to talk about when you're not in an altered state. And then the compound sort of, for me, I kind of had a break for a while because I realized, I wasn't going out as much anymore. I was moving to this intentional space, but my career was growing and I felt like, I didn't have time to dive deep into these other things. And then what ended up happening is there was a resurgence in the psychedelic space when COVID hit. When we all got stuck at home,
sure.
When we all realized, okay, now we have time to maybe explore or maybe things started to come up in our own lives that we had been ignoring. And so then we were looking for a way of how do we connect deeper? How do we begin to heal ourselves? And that's when I realized that my career in the health and wellness space involved some altered state practices like meditation, breath work, as well as I talk about a wellness toolbox, which I know we'll get into. But I had all of these tools that I was using, and I too was at home in COVID. My first business imploded because it was in the travel space, and as we know, travel went away for a while. And it was at that time that I realized I'm leaning on all the wellness tools that I have, but I don't feel like they're helping me in the way that they used to. So I feel a little stuck. I feel like I need something else. And then that's when psychedelics sort of re-entered my world, because all of a sudden people were talking about using them for anxiety and depression, and more research started coming out. And I started to say, oh, well, I have experience with these different molecules. I haven't necessarily been using them in this way, but I know all about how to prepare for this stuff. And I know all about how to work with what comes up. And that's kind of how I entered into this in a work situation and not just for personal exploration.
Thank you for that. Okay, now before we go any further, I know there's probably got to be a handful of people out there who have joined in and have no idea what we're talking about. What exactly are psychedelics? What is psychedelia? What does it entail? And what types of compounds are we actually talking about here?
Well, yeah, this is also, it varies widely. And I think the biggest disclaimer that I need to make first before we get into this is I'm not a doctor, so I can't give medical advice, and I'm not a lawyer. And so, you know, whoever's listening, if you decide you want to use these compounds, you need to figure out what's legal where you live, because these things are legal in some places, but not in others. And so you have to figure out kind of what your risk level is as well. Psychedelics and plant medicine, they're kind of grouped together when we talk about this space, because what we're looking is using, whether they're made in a lab or whether they come from nature, something that is going to shift our brain chemistry and shift the mental state that we're in, and sometimes the physical state that we're in as well. So it's kind of a broad term when we talk about psychedelics. The root of the word psychedelics means mind bending. That's kind of where all of this comes from, and that's why both plants and synthetic are grouped under this word psychedelic. The psychedelic and plant medicine, altered state healing, or connection with God and the universe, right? There's different reasons people use these compounds. They have been around since the beginning of time, since before humans, right? Some of these grow from the earth. And so it is indigenous tribes thousands and thousands of years ago that first discovered and started working with these. So there's lots of theories about when certain substances and compounds started to be used. And a lot of people will say, you know, they think, you know, various religions, or you go back in looking at the history of religion, and maybe some of the leaders had visions, right? And so some people said, well, they must have been taking plants that gave them these visions, right? Whether that was written down or not. So, you know, there's a lot of different theories about this, but this work goes back thousands and thousands of years. The Greeks, so this was also written about in the time of the great philosophers, Socrates, Plato, the Eleusinian mysteries you may have heard of. This was kind of like a group that a secret society, if you will, that met back in the day, these male philosophers, and they drank a tea that was passed around that had some kind of mind altering substance in it. We're not 100% sure exactly. There is some root, I believe, of some of the mushrooms in that, but things have evolved, of course, you know, over time as well. So yeah, these things go back. And they've been here. And then in, I would say, more modern day, in the 1940s, and again, this is the history that we have, and the history that is written about is very Western centered, right? And it's important to acknowledge that as
Certainly.
well. Again, yeah, these things come from indigenous communities. But they often have the stories that have been lost the most, right? Those stories haven't been recorded. They haven't been passed down. So a lot of the modern day thinking on psychedelics and scientific research as it relates to psychedelics comes from Europe and the United States and Canada, right? From these regions. And Albert Hofmann was a Swiss chemist, who synthesized Lucy in 1939, accidentally dosed himself in the early 1940s, and rode his bicycle home on April 19th, which is now known as Bicycle Day. And that's when he had like the first recorded Lucy trip that he wrote about in his journals. And that's when this stuff was not illegal. It wasn't Schedule 1 in the US. And so he started, as a scientist and as a researcher, started sending out this compound to psychiatrists around the world to have them use their clients kind of as experiments. It's John Hopkins started doing research at this time. So that's kind of some of the path, right? You talk to indigenous people as well, and they will tell you that mushrooms they grow everywhere around the world, different
Sure.
strains, different genetics. But Maria Sabina is probably the most famous maestra or Mazatec healer that was using these in the indigenous culture. And a Western man ended up meeting her, R. Gordon Wasson, and she invited him to take part in the ceremony, and he wrote the big article in the 60s for Life magazine. And that's what started the interest as well in the West. And so you can see, people have said, well, Albert Hoffman also went to Maria Sabina, took some mushroom genetics, and then started developing them as well in his lab. And so again, there's credit that gets put in different places, but again, these go back thousands and thousands of years.
Well, thank you for that. Yeah, thank you for that. I know that there's a lot of people out there that are just wondering, what are we talking about? What are psychedelics and why would we want to do them? So, was there a defining moment, a certain experience or a revelation, or perhaps even a struggle that set you on this path? I know you spoke about during COVID, life kind of going through an upheaval and a change, but what really said, hey, let's do psychedelia, let's do psychedelic counseling and mentorship and that sort of thing? What set afoot the Reveal community?
Yeah. So, as I mentioned, the first company that I started in 2009 was the first health or wellness hospitality company in North America. And basically what we did is health and wellness travel. And I planned trips and took people mostly to Asia, but to visit indigenous cultures where the West had started to use its practices, like yoga and Chinese medicine, for example. And we'd lost that thread of where these things came from. And we shifted and changed them for the Western world. And I had seen, even though at that time I wasn't really using psychedelics myself, I started at that time, ayahuasca was probably the most common and talked about psychedelic substance that people understood were coming from indigenous communities, right?
And longest lasting.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there's ones that last longer. Yeah, there's ones that iboga, which comes from Africa, can be a 36-hour journey, but we can get there. So what started happening is I was taking people on vacation around the world to go into indigenous cultures, understand where the root of the practices they were using in their life came from, and to see how these indigenous cultures were using yoga, plant medicine, Chinese herbal medicine, energy healing, all of these things. And what, unbeknownst to me, some of these travelers that were going to the jungles in Peru to do ayahuasca, they would go on these trips. They'd maybe be in the jungle for 14 days, and then they'd come home. And then they'd say to themselves, well, now what? I feel like my life has totally changed. I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do with what happened to me. And somehow they found my travel company and started traveling with me. And the travel that they were doing with me was part of what we now come to understand as integration, because oftentimes I was introducing them to yoga teachers, or I was traveling with coaches and therapists, or we were talking about how to regulate and change your nervous system. All of these things that in the end, you can use with psychedelics. At the time, I didn't have the language for this. But psychedelics for healing started to become very present in my life. And what happened is, as I was carried through into the pandemic and my travel business closed and I was opening another company, at the same time, I was getting into the startup space. And what I started to see in the startup space, which was really popular, is during COVID, a lot of startup founders were experimenting with psychedelics themselves, right? They were trying to use it to get better at work, or they were using it to get like big visions and ideas about how to run a business or how to change their life. And what I started to notice was people were using these compounds for healing and conscious expansion and for other things, but they started to have the same issue that would happen with people that came out of the jungle in Peru, is they didn't know what to do with the insights once they had them, or they didn't know if they had a bad or a challenging experience, how to, like, what to do with that either. And what I realized was, based on my almost 15 years at that point work in the health and wellness, and having all the tools and teaching people how to build wellness toolboxes, that absolutely applied to psychedelics. And I started to think of psychedelics as just another wellness tool that you can have in your toolbox. And that was when I said to myself, okay, I know how to help these people. I know how to help prepare them for these experiences so that they can, if they have goals or intentions or things they want to work on, I know how to get them to a place where they don't just like go crazy and, hope they get a vision, right? They can try to work towards something. And then I can also help them on the other side once they come out, try to figure out what happened, how to work with what happened. And so it just started, I started consulting in this space. I live in Southern California on Tongva land, and I started a in-person women's psychedelic community here, where we as women could meet in a space and talk about our journeys and give advice to each other, what works, what doesn't work. We could bring in educators and understand what was happening in the space with the science, with the research, with the art, with, all the things. And out of that grew Reveal, because people started to say to me, this is great. And yes, you live in California, and you're consulting with startups in California, and you're working with women in person in California. But California, this stuff is, it's not legal. It's decriminalized in some areas, but it's talked about a lot. Sure. But it's not talked about in the South as much. It's not talked about in the center of the country as much. And so right. People said to me, I think if I could access what you're offering with Reveal, but in the center of the country, then let's, I would love that. And so that's kind of how Reveal came to be as what I do now.
So in those early days, was there resistance of any kind from family, society, even from yourself, when stepping into this field still considered kind of fringe?
Yeah, no, for me, I've always gone against the grain. And so that was never a surprise. I mentioned my first company was the first of its kind, a first wellness hospitality company. So I was used to being told no. That was not something that ever bothered me. It's in my personality type to be an entrepreneur and to help people, right? I always wanted to find a way to bridge that. And I would say from family, it's really interesting. My parents are very supportive. Their support and their interest came in trying to educate themselves. So in the very beginning, when I told them what I was doing, I would get text messages and emails and links to like a research paper or something that they were reading, because that's how they understood it as well. Like, oh, okay, this is grounded in some science. So maybe Sure. What she's doing is we don't understand it, and we might never do it, but there is some legitimacy here. And it's funny, I was just told by a family member who was visiting me recently, they said, oh, when you first started doing this, your parents were very worried about what might happen, which I totally understand. But the coaching that I do, the education that I offer, the nervous system work that I offer, is not illegal. It is Sure. a controversial subject, but I don't serve medicine. I don't supply medicine. And so what I do isn't illegal. It just happens to be in this kind of underground gray area.
Gotcha. No, yeah, I'm very familiar with the scene myself, having been in this industry professionally for up until 2018. That's what I did too. I was in the I was in the mycology industry. I think you were doing a talk with a woman who owned a mushroom company in Colorado.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, I did the exact same thing for years and years and years, and I ended up selling that company in
Amazing.
2018. But yeah, so I'm very familiar with
Yeah.
the gray area of the market and things that you can and
Yeah.
can't say. Now, so you've worked with a range of substances and traditions. Can you walk us through which psychedelic compounds you're most familiar with and how they differ
Yeah.
in experience and purpose? You know, what makes substances like psilocybin, LSD, ayahuasca, ketamine, and DMT unique in the way that they open your consciousness?
Um, yeah, so it's fascinating because it is a what I am going to describe is not necessarily what happens for everybody. And this is what's interesting about the psychedelic space and the research that's continuing to happen is there's still so much that we don't know. It's also if anyone in here has ever had an experience, you never replicate the same experience. It doesn't matter if you take the same substance and if you take it from the same batch and you take the same amount, you're not going to have the same experience twice. And we know some of that is because your mindset can dictate that. Your body, you know, what you've eaten or not eaten can potentially dictate that. And then there's things that we don't know. We think possibly DNA could play a role. We think possibly our personality can play a role. We know our lifestyle and the way that we've been raised and traumas and live wisdoms that we have play a role. But that's what's fascinating is there are some anecdotal stories where things kind of look and sound the same, but they're not exactly the same.
Sure.
So the classic, sorry.
Oh no, I'm just agreeing with you, going along with you.
Oh,
I'm
okay.
listening.
Yeah. So the more classic psychedelics that are most talked about and the ones that people have done the most are, and I talk in code, but you tell me if it's okay. I never want to get anyone in trouble.
You be as safe as
Lucy.
you want to be.
I hate it because sometimes we don't know what we're talking about, but Lucy or acid is very common. Ayahuasca, the magic mushies, Molly or ecstasy, Dimitri, which you mentioned as well, Dimitri can be on its own, but it's also part of the ayahuasca brew.
Right.
San Pedro and the San Pedro variations, which is a cactus. These are the most common. Ibogaine is gaining in popularity, and we can talk about that as well. Ibogaine is typically a synthetic derivative of iboga, which is a psychedelic shrub from Africa, which is native to Gabon. So there's many, many other compounds. There's many, many other kinds of fungi that people experience, but those are the most common. And then ketamine as well. But ketamine is not considered a traditional psychedelic because even though you can have psychedelic experiences on ketamine, ketamine is a dissociative anesthetic and it works on different parts of the brain than like the ones that are more serotonin related. So those are the compounds that most people have maybe tried or are working with. Myself, I have, and cannabis, of course, but cannabis as well. Like not everybody considers it a psychedelic. It just, you can have psychedelic effects. Again, that's why when we talk about altered state, you know, it includes so much.
Sure.
It's also really challenging, right? For people who don't understand this work or who grew up like myself in the DARE era, when we were taught like all of these compounds are bad, and lumped in with that are compounds that are much more addictive, right? The addictive quality of mushies and Lucy and Aya and San Pedro is very, very low. Whereas like alcohol, snow, like these other things, the addiction is very, very high. Ketamine is somewhere in the middle and cannabis is somewhere in the middle. And so there's all these different things that you have to look out for. But myself, I mentioned cannabis was the very first thing that I tried when I was a teenager, probably like most people. I use it occasionally. I find that because There are people who work with it in microdoses or small doses very intentionally. I find that of all the compounds that I've ever worked with to be more escapism, whereas mushrooms or Molly or ketamine or Dimitri, these are compounds where they're very internal. You meet yourself, you get insights, right? It's like you actually can't escape too much.
Right. Yeah. It's an experience on its own. Some people say that different compounds or different psychedelics have a different personality or different energies.
Yes.
In your experience, does each medicine kind of carry its own intelligence?
It does. And, some people will tell you they don't think synthetics do, but I happen to not feel that way. I happen to feel like these all have kind of spirits. And sure, you can talk about if something comes from the earth, that maybe that spirit or that intelligence is what connects us to the greater world. But I also feel that connection to the greater world on something like ketamine, which is made in a lab. So,
Certainly.
I for sure feel that. For me, there's different signatures. And again, anecdotally, people agree with this, but to each his own. For me, I talk a lot about magic mushrooms being a heart medicine. They're very physical for me. I can feel, I can have pains. I can, feel like I need to shake and release energy. I can feel a lot of love. I can feel connected to ancestors. And these things don't happen every time, but often enough that I've associated that with that compound. Whereas with Molly, which is made in a lab, I also consider it a heart medicine, but where mushies make me want to go inward and have my eyes closed, have good music on, connect with deep ancestors or whatever is happening in terms of if I'm working on something or I'm trying to listen to messages. Molly, while it's a heart medicine, for me, it's very social and very external, right? And mushies are very internal. So I use Molly in relation. I mentioned I use it with my partner, right? For me, it's a very social medicine because you want to talk and it helps you reframe the way you think about things. It is called the love rug because it allows you more empathy and compassion for yourself. And it allows you to feel more connected to whoever you're in relationship with while you're on the compound, right? So very different, both heart medicines for me, but very different in terms of the signature of them. Whereas something like Lucy, I feel like is a head medicine, meaning it can be internal, but you have more existential thoughts, right? You think about the world and how was the world made, or could you visit other planets, right? I don't have that on mushies. On mushies, I'm connecting to what's been here. And Lucy kind of is more forward thinking. I don't feel it in my body as much. I feel that my thoughts are more active. So
Sure.
yeah, all of these different medicines can give you different feelings. And when you start sharing in community about these experiences, you start to see this overlap with people of having very similar, not the same, but very similar things.
So for someone hearing this for the first time, how would you describe the difference between a recreational trip and a true therapeutic or spiritual journey?
Yeah, it comes down to preparation and intention, in my opinion. And I learned this the hard way. Once you go down the path of making this an intentional healing or spiritual experience, it's really hard to go back to having fun. I literally tried this with a mushy experience. I had a incredible mushroom experience where I was with an indigenous healer in the mountains in Mexico. It was this gorgeous ceremony. And I came back, I don't know, months and months later, and I was out in the desert with some friends, and we decided to do a small amount of mushies. Just, we were having fun, we were grooving, we were in the desert. And literally the mushroom said to me, "This isn't fun anymore. Like you do this for internal work. So like, what are you doing?" And
I
I
love the
went,
way you
wait,
put
what?
that. The mushroom said to you, because that is what it is. The mushroom speaks to you, and there's no other way of stating that other than just the way you did that. The mushroom said to me. I love that. That is so great.
Yeah.
I also have to
So
chime
yeah,
in
I
on that particular portion of it. I too, very similar experience. I started off in the recreational space as a teenager and then became, growing, my own mushrooms, going through all of the different varieties that there are in the world, over 400 different species, that all produce psychedelic compounds, to manufacturing lysergic diethylmide, to manufacturing DMT, and everything else that there is to manufacture in the psychedelic world. And I found that once I started studying the compounds, once I started studying the experiences, the fun was over. The fun was completely over. I never got back to that. And then the messages started to change for me. And the message was, you don't need this anymore. Don't do this. This isn't for you. Now, much of it, and there was some deeper stuff depending on what compound was what, but interesting that you stated the same thing, that it spoke to you and said, hey, that's not what we're doing here anymore. Interesting.
well,
Anyway,
and to go
carry
back
on
to
with
your
that.
Yeah, to go back to your question about the signature as well of these experiences, for people who don't know, ketamine, a lot of people enjoy ketamine because it's fast acting. The experience doesn't last very long. It depends if you space out your dose, but typically, from beginning to end, it can be like an hour and a half. I wouldn't suggest driving after that, but you feel back to normal, right? Where mushrooms, for example, can be 4, 6, 8, 10 hour experience. So one time I didn't have a lot of time, but I knew I had some questions I want answered. And I thought, well, instead, I don't have time for a mushroom journey. I'll do some ketamine. And I was in my ketamine experience and I'm like, have this deep intention and these deep questions I want answered. And the ketamine said to me, that's not what this is for. You need to do mushrooms for that. For what you're asking, you need to do mushrooms. And I was like, okay, interesting. So yes, they do have a different signature and they do talk to you in different ways, for sure. But I think even recreational experiences can be intentional. You can make them intentional. But the thing that I see when with the clients that I work with, so I work with people through one-to-one coaching. And sometimes to get people prepared, even for the coaching, I have courses that people can download and some free workbooks. So people start looking inward and asking themselves basic lifestyle questions, or do I feel ready? Or what does fear feel like? These kinds of things that can come up in these journeys. And what's interesting to me is the older that you get, the more lived wisdom we have, the more habits that we have ingrained. Maybe there are things that we want to change. And I have seen, especially like maybe you did these recreationally as a teenager and they were fun and you just enjoyed time with your friends. And here you are in your 30s or your 40s and you're trying this compound again. And you're like, wait a second, this isn't fun. I'm crying in the corner. What is happening? Right. And it doesn't make any sense. And it's because, we have the saying in the space that the medicine gives you what you want, gives you what you need, not what you want. And so I think that people can end up, this is what I talk a lot about, harm and risk reduction, is people take these like, I'm going to have this great recreational experience, not understanding that other things could happen based
Sure.
on what messages want to come through or what the plant or compound wants to tell you. And so I think, yes, in some situations, depending on your setting, maybe it can be more recreational, but you have to be prepared for something intentional to happen. And the like harm and the freakouts come when people aren't prepared that it might go a different way than they assume.
Certainly. Now, moving kind of into your clientele, who tends to find their way to you? Are they spiritual seekers? Are they people that are healing from trauma, curious minds, or maybe just all of the above?
They are all of the above. The majority of people I work with my coaching happen to be 35 and above. I work with quite a few people who are 50, 60. And I think that for me, what people tend to resonate with me and my approach and my philosophy and the frameworks that I've created to help keep people safe is I describe myself as having one foot in the woo and one foot on the ground. So I can see both sides of it. I was born and raised in the Midwest, but left as soon as I could and spent most of my life in New York City, now living in Southern California. And so I have appreciation for, the hustle, and I have appreciation for the nature, right? I have appreciation for, sometimes, especially where I grew up, you can be raised a little sheltered. And so sometimes that idea, not knowing of the world, can show up as fear, for example. So I can talk to all of these different parts of people. And so I tend to find people who want to be responsible, but aren't sure how to have these experiences responsibly. And then they find me on a podcast or a show like this or on TikTok. And they start listening to my approach, and they kind of resonate with, okay, she can go to the woo and the spiritual side, but she's going to keep me safe and grounded, right? She's going to make sure that I do a medical screening. So I'm not going to put myself in unwanted danger. She's going to make sure that I understand that if I'm in a relationship, and whoever I'm in a relationship with, if they're not doing these compounds, me having this experience is going to affect my relationship, whether I want it to or not. And so how would you approach that, right? And I coached people through all of these different kinds of things, because what they are going after, healing in some way or conscious expansion in some way. Some could be for a specific diagnosis, a trauma, anxiety, depression. It could be, if you're like me, I don't have any medical diagnosis, but I, like everybody, live in this world and have a level of anxiety and depression that's just swirling around me, and overwhelm and burnout, right? All of these things. And so these compounds help with that as well. And so I help people resource themselves. I talk a lot about how I don't promote this work. I don't think everybody should do this work. I do think that everybody, if they are going to do this work, they should be prepared emotionally, physically, mentally, and do it in a way that they reduce their risk. Because again, the whole point of using these things is to heal, is to transform the way you think, is to end up somewhere new. I talk a lot about using these compounds to have a 1 degree shift in your life. If you think about going for a hike and you start off in one direction, and let's say, someone is coming towards you and you shift over to the left to let them pass. If you stayed on the left and kept going in 10 miles, you're going to be in a completely different place than where you thought you wanted to go. And so I try to help people make sure that they can get to that shift and maintain that shift. Because that's the other thing, as I'm sure you know about this work, is the medicine experience is one small peak part of a bigger journey. And if you're just doing this for the medicine, if you're just chasing insights, or you're just trying to escape through this and you're not working with what comes out the other side, you can dysregulate yourself and not know how to get back to like a grounded state. You can, end up having to heal from your healing, which I've seen a lot for people who don't prepare properly. And that, you never want that, right? You don't want to go into a healing experience and then have to heal from your healing.
I really liked the fact that you said that, not everybody's ready for this. You're not just trying to be an advocate for let's go do drugs. You're really trying to focus on the health and wellness aspect of that. For the listeners out there, you've got to go check out Linden's website at revealcommunity.world. And she even has a course called Before You Say Yes. Before You Say Yes is a course that will answer your questions for you. Is this something that you need to do? Is this something that you should pursue? Is it safe for you? All of those types of things. So that's at revealcommunity.world. And Linden, let's go ahead and take just a moment to take a musical break. Let's refill your coffee. Let's go to the little boy or girl's room, whatever it is that needs to be done at this particular time. For the audience that are out there, this is a fantastic time to go ahead and hit that share button, hit that repost button, invite some friends, get some folks in here, because you got about 3.5 minutes while we listen to this groovy beat. And welcome back, night travelers. You're still tuned in to Wolf Radio Live. The music has carried us through shadows and light, drifting over landscapes both imagined and real. And now we return to the mind's frontier. Joining me once again is Linden Schaffer, founder of the Reveal Community, a guide for those brave enough to journey inward, to meet the self in altered states, and to navigate the mysteries that lie beyond ordinary perception. Linden, welcome back. For those just tuning in, you're about to step into a conversation that touches on consciousness, the psychedelic realm, and the hidden corners of the human experience, the kind of places where the mind, the spirit, and the unknown converge. So let's pick up where we left off and explore what it truly means to open the doors of perception. Hello again. So, let's go deep for a minute, Linden. I've heard people talk about these spirits, these entities, and patterns that happen within their messages. Have you noticed any common patterns that people receive, themes that repeat across their journeys? And if so, what are some of these themes that are repetitive?
Yeah, it's really interesting. And we go back to this idea of doing this work intentionally. And so people, when I work to prepare them for these journeys, and then they have these experiences and I work with them on the other side of them, you hear a lot of, people wanting to work on relationships, maybe with their parents. And so it can bring up a lot of, they call ayahuasca, for example, the grandmother. And a lot of people move towards that compound when they're working on healing a relationship with their mother or their grandmother, right? Or someone in that lineage. So there's a lot of these kind of patterns, again, that people have anecdotally told throughout time. And it's also how people decide, like, oh, I want to use this compound because I'm working on my issues with my mother, or San Pedro, which is the grandfather, right? I have it with my father issues. So I do think in terms of people seeing things, sure, right? When you work with Dimitri, that's when most people report meeting aliens or entities, right, on that particular compound. So those kinds of things can come up. I have found that mushrooms too can also be very ancestral. And just in different ways. We talk a lot in the mushroom space, and you mentioned this as well, about the thinning of the veil, right? The ability when you're in these altered states to communicate with people that are no longer here. And sometimes there are people you know and recognize, and sometimes they're not. Maybe they're representatives of something you've been working on. So it's interesting.
When we read like ancient esoteric writings, we see that there's evidence in antiquity that time is not linear, that time truly does exist. What was and is to come is simultaneous, right? And it all sounds good when we read it, and it kind of makes a little bit of sense. I found that in these experiences, we truly understand what that means and experience a bit of that. Would you agree to that?
Absolutely. And people will say to you, what do you mean you spoke to your so-and-so who's no longer here? And I was like, I don't know how to explain it. They were there when I was there. And so we had a conversation, and that's why, people can look at you and think like, have their own perceptions or judgments when you're on these compounds. But if you've ever done them, you understand how sometimes it's unexplainable what happens, how sometimes we don't have language. And some people are more open to that and some people aren't. And that's where your mindset comes in. Some people have reported when working with these compounds, because they're so open to these things, maybe their psychic ability or their mediumship ability, that window opens for them. And they feel, even when they're not on the compound, more in touch, maybe with people who are no longer here. Or we hear a lot of talk about spirit guides, for example. And so for sure, people can get very, very connected to that. I've had these experiences where, I communicate with people who are no longer here. I communicated with people who are still alive, but aren't physically with me. So, again, just because we are both around, it's still that space and time kind of issue is, when I try to explain how these things appear, language really fails. And sometimes it is a mental picture of that person, and sometimes just a feeling or an essence. Or, for example, for some people like myself, my sense of smell I can smell a perfume or a scent and it reminds me of somebody. And all of a sudden I know they're here. So is your mind making these connections? Are we living in this linear space? Are we living in this thin veil world? I mean, I kind of feel like the answer is yes all around.
Sure, sure. And through these compounds, we're able to experience it. That's kind of the way that I found it too. Now this is kind of out of my questions here. This is just off sidetrack, but I've got to ask, have you ever had an experience, or have any of your clients ever had an experience that they reported where they're aware of, maybe it's someone else in the room, but it's the inner person, that person's true identity inside the person, and it may not be the same person that you know on the outside. Funny thing is, yeah, and it's real even after the experience. But what I found is, once that inner person knows that you realize what that inner person is, that changes the relationship. Did you ever find that? Or okay, and it's
Absolutely.
unspoken. You don't have to speak it. They know that you know, and you know that you know.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. And so this is why, it's really important. Again, all of my work is really centered on preparation, to make sure that people know that this can happen. It might not happen, but sometimes this can really scare people. If you don't know, if it feels like it comes out of nowhere, or if it feels, let's say, dark, right? We talk a lot about the Jungian concept of shadow self. Or you may have heard, if you're in this healing space, about your inner child, right? There's kind of these representations that we have, and these can all appear, right? Sometimes it's because we've repressed the memory of something, or that part of ourselves didn't get the attention or whatever it needed. Its needs weren't met at some time, and so it comes in to our consciousness, and our being. It presents itself in some way. And that's also why I work with a lot of internal family systems therapists. And this concept of internal family systems is a psychological theory that was created in the 80s by a man named Dick Schwartz. Some people say it's controversial. I happen to like the framework, because what I understand about internal family systems is we're made up of a whole bunch of different parts, and you put those parts together and it becomes our whole self. In a psychedelic experience, like you said, sometimes those parts can separate and we can see them or be in conversation or in relationship with them. And if we don't understand that they're part of us, it can be really scary coming out the other side thinking, well, I have this thing in me and I don't know what it is, but I kind of think it's me. And we saw each other and we recognized each other, but I don't know what to do with this. And that's the part of internal family systems, is basically, when you're using psychedelics and it breaks your psyche open, integration and understanding internal family systems helps us put ourselves kind of back together and recognize that these parts might always be in us, but they don't necessarily have to control us. Or maybe it helps us understand, like, oh, I react in certain situations because my need wasn't met in this particular part of me.
I see. Okay. So, some people talk about meeting the source or the divine. Others report terrifying, shadowy figures. What determines which side of the mirror someone sees?
This is such an interesting question. And the honest answer is we don't know, right? We don't know. It's really hard to research these things because it's stories. Right. And oftentimes stories and meaning making happens because of our lived wisdom. Right? I could have the same experience. I'm not religious, but I could have the same experience as someone very religious, and they might describe what they felt in religious terms. And I might describe it in more spiritual or esoteric or nature terms. Certainly. But we're still talking about the same thing, right? And so I think it's really challenging for us to understand that. I think there's a few things, and again, we're trying to study this, but some of the Western research on psychedelics is still new. And there was a period during the Nixon administration in the 60s, 70s, and 80s when research was halted, and
Sure, the
literally
war on
people
drugs.
they feared for their lives, and a lot of that research was actually burned. And so in the late 90s and early 2000s, as research started coming back, unfortunately, some people were starting basically from scratch because we couldn't build on the research that had been done before. So one of the hypotheses or theories as well is your personality might determine if you see something scary or not scary. We don't know for sure, but it's a theory and they're trying to test it. And, again, anecdotally based, I can't tell you anything, but when I was with this Mazatec healer in the mountains of Mexico, she kept saying to me, "You're such a happy person. You see things like you see the bright side of everything." Now, does that, I am someone who is optimistic and that is my personality. I didn't know her very well. She clearly saw something, right? And she's worked with thousands of people. This is her lineage. Her mother was a healer. Her grandmother was a healer, right? So she comes from this lineage. And so for her to say that, and for us in the West to start to say, well, maybe if your personality is more positive, you have more positive experiences. We don't know, right, if that's true, but it's something that we're looking into. I do think your mindset as well plays a lot into if you're going to see something scary or not. And that's why, again, preparation is really, really important. I talk about this a lot to give people examples. I had a mushroom experience, and this was the experience, again, where the mushrooms told me this wasn't for fun anymore. I had a really challenging experience because, one, I was trying to do something fun when it was supposed to be work. But
Sure.
a lot of challenging things happened during that experience for me. And I afterwards, I said to myself, I don't know if I need to work with these compounds anymore. It wasn't enjoyable. I didn't get any intentionality or any of the insights, right? It just, I don't know. And I saw things that kind of freaked me out a little bit. The eyes closed, eyes open, like, oh, nobody's there. Oh, somebody's there. No, that kind of thing. You're not sure what's real. So I said to myself, I'm going to not, I don't know if I need to do this anymore. And then sure enough, like a year later, I get a tap on the shoulder from these plant allies that said, you've
Been long enough.
taken enough of a break. It's time for you to come back and visit with us. And I got so fearful. And I said to myself, I don't want to have all this fear going into this experience. I don't know what's going to happen, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to use fear as my intention. And I'm going to try to understand where fear comes from. What is it that I'm afraid of? Try to get very curious about it so that when I go and I see, because I'm sure I'm going to see something scary, right? I'm going to know how to interact with it. And I spent 2 weeks working with this concept of fear before I journeyed, and then it never showed up in my journey. There was no fear. So again, is this mindset work where I've investigated something scary so much that I got to the other side and I'm not afraid of what I thought I was afraid of? And so therefore in the journey, I didn't see anything scary. It's hard to tell.
It's interesting that you say that. That's very similar to my own journey in that a lot of it was fun for a long time. Then I went into the research phase where I wanted to figure it out. I was on the quest for knowledge, and you're always on the edge of understanding. When you come back, you're just at the tip of understanding the next breakthrough, and you'll probably have 5 epiphanies during that particular experience. But you just want that next one, the one that lets you understand everything. And then I went through about a 10-year period where every single time was telling me, don't do this. I'm telling you not to do this. Stop this. This isn't what you need to do with your life. I had some that were premonitions telling me, this is what's going to happen if you continue down this path. Lo and behold, it did. Like all of it, every bit of it came true. And anyhow, it was just interesting the way that they played in to all of that. I've got another question because there's probably no one else that I could really ask that has enough experience on this. So I've got to ask, have you noticed, because I noticed this for years, that writing would become very similar to Sanskrit? like if I looked at a book, it would be a moving letter, like it would be an animated letter string of letters that looked so much like Sanskrit. Now, I didn't know if it was Sanskrit. It really looked like something from Lord of the Rings, to tell you the truth. But it would be kind of moving. And as I researched all of these different ancient languages, Sanskrit or the ancient Vedic texts are the closest resemblance to that alphabet that I would see over and over and over. And I'm not versed in ancient alphabets, okay? So this is the thing. And this went on with multiple compounds for years and years at a time. I never understood what any of the messages were. Never did. I don't know that I was supposed to. I think more than anything, I was supposed to understand that this is some sort of a source language, or writing a way of capturing the language. And that's as far as I ever got. Have you found that to be a common thing?
Yeah, and I think again, when we go back to this language, and we in the West can use similar language because we only have so many words to describe things. So for sure, people talk about feeling like they've returned to the source. People talk about seeing sacred geometry or languages in their mind, like you mentioned. For me personally, I often have an eye mask on and I'm not looking at anything because it's too stimulating for my brain. Like there's enough happening that I'm seeing. So I'm not the girl who can watch a movie while I'm on these things. I'm not that person. There are people for sure. But yeah, you hear these stories all the time of, I saw my past lives. I saw my time, my past timeline or my future timeline, as you mentioned. For me, I describe it as well because I don't necessarily have words for it, but I have this innate embodied feeling of, yes, this is, we are all one. And this is where, we kind of all came from the same place, whatever that place is, I don't know, but for sure you can start to pull the threads and they appear in different ways.
Gotcha. Okay. So, throughout history, from the Eleusinian mysteries of ancient Greece to the shamanic ayahuasca rituals in the Amazon, humanity has turned to altered states for insight. What do you think that psychedelics have been a part, or why do you think the psychedelics have been a part of human culture for millennia and millennia?
I think we're all in a quest to understand ourselves, right? I think that, I don't know what the statistic is, but we don't use all of our brain. And so I feel like there's so much we don't know just about life. I also think that we have so many questions of, scientifically, you can look at how we got here and how evolution works, but it's a hard concept to grasp, all these years later. And so I think people are just fascinated with where we come from, where we're going. I think many people, myself included, believe we're not the only conscious beings or entities, whatever you want to call it, in this solar system. It seems impossible that would be the case. So I think people are just super curious and they want to understand this connection to something larger. We all have these existential crises, and that's why some of these compounds are being prescribed for people who have terminal diagnoses, or they have this existential crisis, because it seems to put our mind at ease, as we don't know what happens when we die, but we feel this sense of peace when we're on these compounds. We feel like there's something bigger than what we can just see in front of us, or we feel like there's something bigger than what we've just personally experienced. And for some reason, it's easier to be agreeable to those thoughts when you're in an altered state.
So how do you see psychedelics fitting into modern spirituality? Are we, in the middle of a neo-mystical, revival? Is that where we're at right now?
Yeah, I think, look, the statistics have been clear that the percentage of people joining organized religion is lower and lower every year, right? There's organized religions that are not growing, but that people still people have gone to organized religions for so many different reasons. One being community, and two, again, being trying to find answers, right? When you have this, why did this happen to me? Or, how do I move through this trauma? And this is where people have been turning for millennia to religions. And because people are starting to think like there may be more to the world, or maybe I don't align with something that comes from, humans creating, maybe there's something more. Yes, I think people are becoming more spiritually conscious. I think that also it's sometimes it's hard, humanity, unfortunately, is not all good. And I think that people are trying to understand, it's really hard to understand somebody who doesn't think like you. Regardless of, what your philosophies are. And so I think, again, this greater connection to compassion and empathy and understanding, people find it easier to embody that in this way, using psychedelics and using compounds, rather than just sitting, let's say, in therapy and having a therapist say to you, you should be nicer to somebody, or like you can intellectualize that, but sometimes that's hard to actually feel that in your body or experience that. And that's what these compounds can connect you to something that's greater than you. And because we are losing community, because we are losing, these places to go where we all care for each other, I think people are trying to find other ways in which to do it, number one. Number two, I think people are feeling really abandoned and let down by the systems that they feel used to help them. Right. I mentioned before, even for me and my little understanding of my wellness toolbox and my tools to cope, yoga, meditation, therapy, coaching, time in nature, dancing, like you name it, those things, especially during COVID when things were hard, I didn't feel like they were helping me. And that's how psychedelics became a bigger force for me, is being able to turn to them in order to feel unstuck. And so I think that's the other thing that people are feeling is like, I've been let down by maybe the traditional medical system. And I feel like there are answers out there in some other form. And so psychedelics for spiritual expansion, as well as physical and mental healing, have also come into play.
Well, thank you for that. For our listeners who are curious out there, what are the biggest safety concerns or misconceptions around psychedelics?
Ooh, safety concerns and misconceptions. So I think misconceptions is, again, the DARE program from the 90s, which was a noted spectacular failure, had amazing marketing. Most of us who lived through that still remember the commercials of your brain as an egg, right? Frying on that. Exactly. So
I remember the guy running that said, I want to be a track star when I grow up. He didn't want to be a crack star.
Yeah, exactly. Now, and that compound is completely different than psilocybin mushrooms, right? So that was the other failure, is like they just grouped all of this together and there was no nuance to, talking about that. But I think people have been conditioned, like this is going to fry your brain. I think people have been conditioned that you're going to take this and jump out a window. I think these are powerful images that we were fed and never really talked about them beyond that. And so I think that's part of the biggest misconception, right? There's research that shows that magic mushrooms, Lucy, Aya, Dimitri, San Pedro, these actually regenerate parts of our brain. These compounds are being used for traumatic brain injury when people are not, like, they weren't able to walk and now they're able to walk. Somebody told me that their family member, their MS symptoms went away when they started using some of these compounds. So again, we don't know how they work completely. We do know that something like magic mushies is good for inflammation. So it lowers inflammation. And so if you have some kind of like rheumatoid arthritis or some kind of disease that is inflammatory based, then these can provide relief. These things are being, again, started to be researched, but also anecdotally, people are turning to these compounds to see if growing these new neural connections can help with Alzheimer's and dementia, right? So I think there's a huge misconception of, oh, these things are going to fry my brain, when actually it's been shown to actually help your brain.
Sure.
So
sure.
I think Yeah, I think that's the biggest misconception. I think in terms of safety, the biggest risk that people run is one, not knowing where your compounds are coming from, or not knowing your source and not being able to test your compounds, right? The number one issue that we want to avoid is having something toxic in something that you're not intending to take in the compound that you're taking, and that you have a reaction to it. Whether that and lands you in an emergency room, or whether, you get hives all over your body. Like, there's so many things that could potentially happen. So being able to test your substances, or, if it is legal to grow these mushies in some places, right? So like if you're growing your own medicine, for example, those are, it's really I would say the number one safety thing is knowing what's in your compound. That will keep you safe. And then there's so much preparation work that people can do, of course. But I do think if you're not going to focus a ton on preparation, your setting is probably the next most important thing to consider. Because when you're on these substances, you are in an altered state. Sometimes you're in a state where you can't consent to what's happening. That means you really need to have an environment and people around you that you trust. You are going to get so vulnerable on these compounds, right? That you don't want to find yourself in a situation that feels unsafe, but you won't know that when you're in that situation. So it's something that you need to be sure that you're planning for before.
I'm glad that you said that, and to really know your compound and know where it's coming from, know what's in it. The very first experience I ever had with DMT, the very first one, and I had thought about it for years. I'd done all the research. I thought I was in the right mental space. And then I tried it out, hit the floor, passed right out. And the first thing that went through my brain was, that's it. You're dead. You just took a drug from some guy on the internet that you didn't know, and now you're dead. And for the next 15 minutes, I thought I was dead. I thought I was completely out of this world, into the nothing, and life was over. I was so thankful when I realized all I had to do was open my damn eyes.
Yeah.
Now, moving forward on that, how do you approach harm reduction, right? Both during and after a psychedelic journey?
Absolutely. So with Reveal, what I did is I created a framework, and everything that I do, the courses, the coaching, the events that I do, the community that I run, all is created from this foundation of the Reveal framework, which is the 5 S's of psychedelic exploration. Those 5 S's are screening, setting, support, and sustainability. We've talked about some of them tonight. The way that I look at these experiences, no matter if you're doing this for the first time or if you're doing this for the 100th time, I look at healing and working with these compounds as a spiral, because every time we use them, we're building on our past wisdom, right? But in order for us to spiral in up or in the direction that we want to go, we have to make sure that our base is steady. And that to me is harm reduction. And so everything that I teach, whether it's the Before You Say Yes course, or again, the one-to-one coaching that I do, having those 5 things, those 5 S's at a place where you understand what they are, and you can prepare them in your wellness toolbox. So whether you need them or not is a form of harm reduction. I don't know what's going to happen to me when I go on this experience, but for me personally, if I needed a therapist, I have 3 that I can call. If I needed to find an integration circle or someone to talk to immediately and make sense of my experience, I have coaches I can call. I know integration circles I can go to. I have an online community I can start asking questions. I don't know if I'm going to need these things, but harm reduction is creating a support network and creating a way for you to sustain whatever happens. And again, so many people, and I don't blame them, right? They don't know that they need these things until it's too late, right? Like you having this experience where you thought you were going to die. I'm so glad that you were able to get out of it. Some people, not only do they think they're never going to get out of it, but even after they come back to what feels like normal consciousness, like they won't leave their house for a couple days because they don't know what happened. They're not sure if they're really okay. They don't know, you know what I mean? There's so many unknowns. And so the basis of harm reduction is creating these support systems so that you have people to talk to.
I love that. I love that. So, okay. So moving into your time to shine, if someone feels, so called to explore this world, how can they begin learning safety, legally, and responsibly through Reveal? Can you tell us about that?
Yeah. Absolutely. So we at Reveal, basically how I talk about Reveal is we're an online educational platform that's offering emotionally intelligent resources to help you prepare and integrate for these experiences. And I do that through courses, through coaching, and through community. And so people can engage however they want. And the way that I look at it, again, is I talk a lot about preparation. That's kind of my foundation where I've kind of planted my flag. It's not the sexiest work, but it's the work I feel that keeps people the safest. I can't tell you how many people have said to me over the years, oh, I wish I would have known about you and what you did because I would have had a very different journey, right? I wouldn't have come out needed healing from healing. I would have set myself up differently. And so you can engage with Reveal in different ways. The online course that I have you mentioned called Before You Say Yes. Before You Say Yes is great for any newcomer or even people who have had a couple experiences and maybe they didn't go the way they wanted and they're curious as to why, or they know this work is for them, but they don't know how to get there. Before You Say Yes is a $37 course. So I try to keep things affordable and accessible. You can do it in less than 45 minutes. It's self-paced. It is 3 videos, a workbook, and a quiz. And I mentioned this healing spiral. That workbook, you will use almost every time you start a new journey, right? Because there are questions about your lifestyle, about your mindset, right? And these things change throughout the day sometimes. And so these are tools that you're going to be able to go back to. I have my coaching. And I do one-to-one coaching. Everything I do is virtual. So I work with people around the world. I tend to work with more Western clients because that's my lens and how I've been trained as well. And so the coaching, it's very custom, but right now the easiest way that people can book me is a one-off session. It's a psychedelic Ask Me Anything. So usually that's the first time if people, especially have never done this before and they want to know, again, is this legal where I live? How would I go about this? What are even my options? Because there's so many options that people don't know. And I started offering these Ask Me Anything sessions because that also was probably the number one way I saw people harm themselves unintentionally was going to the first retreat or taking the first compound they were ever offered. And they don't know anything about either one. They don't know if it's the right one for them. They don't know if it's going to give them the results they want, right? And so it's important to understand what's out there. And so a lot of my one-off psychedelic AMAs are just about explaining the landscape to people of what they potentially could do. You can book a 6-session series with me where we dive into those 5 S's very deeply. The first one is getting to know you and your history and all that stuff. And then we dive into the 5 S's. And again, that helps you basically create this wellness toolbox, which you'll have for the rest of your life. So, you work with me for a short amount of time, but you have these tools that will always be available to you. I have my online women's community that is run through Mighty Networks. So if it's like a private Facebook kind of community. And within that, Reveal, as I mentioned, when we started, I launched in Southern California, a in-person women's group. And so Reveal's online community kind of came out of that women's group. So my coaching and my courses, everyone can do, but the online community is still just for women. And within that community, we do monthly integration circles. There are weekly journal prompts, so you can start, going deeper in your own work. There are underground guides that facilitate medicine. And so I do interviews with them. So you can watch interviews and really start to understand how people work, what kinds of medicines they serve, what kind of environments do they serve them in. This is not something that's really accessible out there. And so it's a great way for you to start to, again, understand what is available. And then the last thing that I do is one-off events. And oftentimes, again, the 6-pack of coaching is the most expensive. But again, before you say yes is $37. That the one-to-one coaching session is $75. My online community is $15 a month. So trying to keep this really accessible. And the individual events I do, either they're free or they're $25, right? It just kind of depends on what's being taught. But I have my next event, these are all online. There is coming up November 12th at 5 p.m. Pacific. And that is with a pharmacologist who works in the psychedelic space. And the reason that's important, again, going back to screening, is not only should you be screening what you take, the actual compound, you need to be screening yourself and your medical history, your mental health history and your physical history. If you're on medication, if you are taking supplements, all of these things can interact with different psychedelics. But most people have said to me, I don't want to talk to my doctor about these things because I don't want this in my medical records, or I don't want my doctor to shame me or dismiss me, or, I feel weird. And
Sure.
I understand that. And so again, this is what I'm trying when it comes to educating and harm reduction. I have worked with this woman before. She worked in the hospital system for 20 years. So she's very versed on medication and diagnosis. And now she uses her talents in the psychedelic space to keep people safe. And oftentimes these one-to-one consults with doctors can be, $300 to $500. And so me being able to get her to come into do an event with me and charge $25 where people can show up and ask their medical questions is amazing.
Certainly. Yeah, that's a gift. So, okay, well, finally, if someone out there tonight, feels that quiet pull, that whisper of curiosity about this path, what is the best way to get a hold of you? I know we're here on TikTok right now, but you exist on other platforms. So what is the best way for them to get hold of you directly?
Yeah. So I would say there's 2 ways. First of all, I'm on TikTok every day. I love this app. It's the app that has allowed me to grow a community. And that's been open to this kind of work. Other apps they ban and take you down, even though what I'm talking about, the work that I do is 100% legal. They take you down. So I'm on TikTok. People can follow me, DM me. I also go live on TikTok almost every day. And then my website, you can email me. So as you mentioned, revealcommunity.world. You can, send an email through there, sign up to our mailing list. On our mailing list, we have a bunch of different events. So that would be the place if coming to events is interesting to you, I get on my mailing list and you'll get notified of all of that as well.
I saw that you had the November 12th on there as well, where they can go and sign up for that as a pop-up when they first get on. That's also where they can sign up for your Before You Say Yes course. I noticed all of that, and that is revealcommunity.world for anyone who's out there listening and wanting to connect. And here on TikTok, that is at Reveal Community. Is your app mentioned, right? At Reveal Community. So, okay, well, I tell you what, folks, there you have it. What a journey it's been tonight through the mind, mystery, and space between. We've walked through ancient rituals, modern science, and the psychedelic realms that blur the border between dream and reality. But the story doesn't end here, folks. Oh, no, because after this break, we've got open lines. That's right, folks. It's your turn, travelers. Whether you've seen the other side, danced with the divine, or just brushed against the edge of the unknown, we want to hear from you. Drop your questions in the comments. Request up to speak. That's those two little red or a little pink and blue characters down there on the bottom. If you'll click on that, you can request up to speak. We can bring you on stage to ask your questions or talk about your experience. And we'd love to hear about your own experiences with psychedelia, altered states, or the mysteries of the consciousness. We'll be taking your calls, your stories, and your theories right after this short musical break. Hey, Hey out there, internet land. Welcome back, wanderers of the dark. You're tuned into Wolf Radio Live, and I'm your host, Mr. Wolf. And now, the night belongs to you. We are in the open lines segment. The chat is alive, and the airways are yours to fill. If you've had a psychedelic experience that's changed you, if you've seen something on the inside that the world outside could never explain, now's the time to share it. If you have questions for Linden, we would love to have you either up on the stage or drop your question down in the chat. Now, I did see that Sage Smith had a question asking about a rare but uncommon brain disease, and are there any mushrooms that can help? Now, on the psychedelic side, I'll let you answer that, but being 20 years in mycology, I can tell her a few of those myself. But would you like to answer from the psychedelic side?
Yeah, I mean, here's what I can say. And unfortunately, this is the disclaimer I have to give to keep both you and me safe. I can't give medical advice because I am not a medical professional, but that is exactly why we're having that event on November 12th, because a pharmacologist will be able to help answer some of these questions. But I do think Mr. Wolf, from a mycology perspective, will probably have more to say than I do on this.
Yeah, well, there's really only about 4 that are really heavily researched for brain functionality, cognitive control, and things like that. Now, not knowing her specifics of whatever ailment she's dealing with, I can't say for sure, but anything to do with brain functionality, your number one mushroom that's going to be any kind of benefit to you at all is going to be your Hericium erinaceus, which is the lion's mane mushroom. It has been good for cognitive disorders, memory focus, and mental clarity, and we've known that for centuries and centuries and centuries, well documented. The next one is called reishi, which is the Ganoderma lucidum. And there again, now these are really interesting mushrooms too, and just to see them growing is cool. I used to cultivate them all for these purposes, and you can buy them in powdered form or you can buy them in a fresh form. I have found that fresh is the way to go. Buying the dehydrated, capsulated mushrooms, I never know if you're getting cut. You know what I mean? And I don't think that they work the same way. As a matter of fact, I know that you have to ingest quite a bit more than a couple of capsules are going to do in order to make any real difference in that. The next possibility is going to be your cordyceps, which is your cordyceps sinensis and militaris, as well as the chaga mushroom. So you've got your chaga, your cordyceps, your lion's mane, and your reishi. Those are going to be the 4 that you would want to do some research on to find out if that would work for your ailment. But those are really the only major, and all of those are either going to be medicinal or culinary mushrooms. There's nothing illegal about any of those. There's nothing psychoactive about any of those. And they're all well documented and researched as to have or helping to improve the brain functionality, cognitive disorders, and mental clarity. So I hope that helps with any of that. He was taking lion's mane, but was told to stop. He'll definitely check out the others. Well, there you go. I don't know who told you to stop or what have you. That's not for me. But those are the 4 that you should do your research on anyhow. So
and those are functional mushrooms, right? In the land of marketing, right? Those are referred to as functional mushrooms. And I think this is where it gets confusing with the psychedelic space, because mushrooms in general are trendy right now. And so it is not legal to sell psychedelic mushrooms, but people are making chocolate bars or coffee or tea with the functional mushrooms you mentioned, putting a picture of a mushroom on the package, and people think it's psychedelic. And so there can be a lot of confusion out there. So I think it is important to understand the difference between the psychedelic mushroom and the functional mushrooms. I live in California. I don't know if this happens in other places. I'm lucky enough that at my farmer's market, they sell fresh forage mushrooms, all the ones that you're talking about. So sure. I know that I have access to them. I don't know if everybody does, but.
And those are really the types of places that you'll find them. I know I grew up in the West Texas area, and the only place you could find any of that would be at an Asian market somewhere. Those tiny little hole-in-the-wall spots that's in a strip mall, and super expensive. Nowadays, you can pretty well find them readily available at a farmer's market, or if you'll just Google, mushroom farm in your area, you're going to find somebody that sells, distributes, or manufactures these products. It's a pretty big thing. Like I said, that's what I did for 20 years.
Yeah, these natural grocery stores, right? That people think of them as like more hippie, like they'll sell
Sure.
some of these too.
Sure. Now I've never seen cordyceps in a grocery store. I'll find that in the little medical markets, but I did find lion's mane quite a bit. So you'll be able to, and that's the best and most researched anyway. That's the one you would want to start with over any of the others. They all do something a little bit different. Uh, Anyhow, while we're waiting on more questions, guys, the lines are open. We never know how this segment's going to go. Sometimes there's a lot of people with a lot of questions. Sometimes there's not. But while we are waiting on some folks to either request up to speak or to ask some more questions about psychedelic journeys, the safety therein, or to tell their own experience, can you tell us maybe one of the most beautiful experiences that have come from one of your clients or from you personally?
Ooh. Yeah, this it's so interesting. I mean, these stories and they kind of on some level start to sound cliche or like tropes, but again, going back to themes, right? People healing their inner child. People being neglected as kids and not getting the love or the attention that they needed and figuring out that they can now give that to themselves, and they have the strength and the power and being able to reflect on, oh, okay, I'm now my 40s, 50s. I've made it this far. I don't have to live in this struggling, place anymore. I don't have to feel like I have to live in this deficit, and I can give myself what I need. And some people, that also allows them to forgive the environments in which they were raised, or see the environments in which they were raised as through a different lens, and stop assigning blame and being able to move forward in their own lives. So that's something that I see a lot, right? This idea of self-love and figuring out how to be with yourself is very beautiful. For me, one of the things that was very unexpected, because it wasn't an intention of mine, it wasn't even something I remember I had. The first intentional ketamine experience that I had, it cured my fear of death. And I remembered afterwards that was a fear I had since when I was a child. In our culture in the West, we don't deal with death a lot. We don't talk about death a lot. Especially I remember when I was a little kid and my grandfather passed away, my parents decided I was too young to go to the funeral. So then as a kid, you start imagining or making things up, right? And so I didn't realize I was still carrying some of that with me. And when I experienced ketamine for the first time and got into what people call a K-hole, which is not bad, depending, on how you, again, prepare, I felt at peace. I felt like it was to feel at one with the universe. My brain and my body said to me, oh, this is what happens after we are no longer in this vessel that we have. And I felt at peace with it. So that was definitely something that was very unexpected, but very beautiful. And I've talked to other people who have had those same experiences.
Okay, well, on the flip side of that, can you tell us one of the most horrifying or crazy, strange experiences that either you have had or maybe a client?
Yeah, again, like seeing these dark things. I want to tell you actually something, and this is why integration is so important, because it started out somewhere negative and ended up somewhere positive. I was observing a coaching session with a woman who was using mushrooms, and she came out of this experience and had these thoughts of like, life is heavy, everything is dark. I don't know if I want to be here anymore, right? A very, very negative place. And as we're hearing her story, and the thread is being pulled, and the woman is going back into the experience, right? She's being guided. Close your eyes. Go back to when you were having that journey. Tell us what you're feeling. Tell us, what's happening. And she started to say, I feel really heavy. I feel my body is heavy. My emotions are heavy. Everything feels very dark. I feel like I'm in a void. Things feel very black. And I see maggots, and I see maggots everywhere. And it's because I'm dead, right? And she's going through this. And as we're hearing the story, then it becomes, the questions become, okay, where, like, have you seen maggots recently? Like, why do you think maggots came up in this journey? And as she's thinking about it and going back and kind of inventorying her life, she realized that she had started composting. And every night she was going to compost and, putting stuff in and turning the compost. And her compost had maggots. And the purpose of the maggots was they were transforming her waste into something new.
Sure.
And so she realized through this experience, she had had this journey. She saw maggots. She thought it meant she was dead and she shouldn't be here anymore. But really, as she went through and processed it, she realized that maggots actually were a symbolism for transformation, not for death. And it completely changed her feelings and how she thought about this experience. And so that's why integration can be so important, because you come out of these experiences and maybe you're feeling very dark or something crazy happened or something really heavy happened. And if you just isolate and you sit with your thoughts and you don't talk about it with people, you can go down these dark paths or these looping paths. And while that can feel like a truth, it might not be the truth.
Sure. No, it's interesting how I always thought it was strange, when you first exit the experience, which it's going to last hours and hours and maybe even into the next day, where it's still playing on your brain a little bit and you're processing, and you may be processing for months. And there are times where and that's what I was going to say. There's times where I will sit back and think about them now and still have revelations over the experiences from years gone by of how they have transformed the meaning from one thing to another. And it's still just as relevant today as it was at those times. So yeah, super, super interesting. I know. And now as far as the darkness goes, which by the way, folks, it's time for your experiences. It's time for your questions and your concerns. This is Open Lines, folks. This is the final segment of the show. This is where you get to have a voice. Just hit that request button or drop your questions down below. And in the meantime, I'll tell you about this craziness. I had several experiences. That's what I was doing, was chasing the unknown, trying to find the answers of the intricacies of the cosmos, unraveling all of these types of things. And that's when I realized that we live in this, created reality, right? Something out there has created all of this. And if that's true, then this cannot be the base reality. And I'm completely sober, and I'm sitting here thinking about these things, for months and months and months and months. And it's going over in my brain. Well, if this is a false reality, which now that's the problem, is it not necessarily was it false? It was just a created reality. Then I started thinking, well, that means that none of this is real. That means that this is not the base, which means that we're not really here. And then the craziness sets in, especially when you're in a space that is unsafe, where you can't talk about these things to anyone else, and you're internalizing all of these things. That's why it's important to have people around you and a support system like Reveal, where you can have a full community to talk about these things with. And to me, the thought process went to, well, if I'm not real, and if these other people aren't real, what's to stop me from ending any of this? What's to say that it would make any difference at all if everyone were unalived? And it went down a very, very dark and twisted pathway for months and months, where I contemplated some crazy things. And in the end, they told me, and I know that's the only way I can put it, is they told me, it doesn't matter. This is the experience you're given, and you are to experience it. That's it. It's not for me to take into my hands and do whatever it is that I do. It's to experience the experience for the experience we were given. And then I left it alone. And guess what? I don't feel near as crazy anymore.
Yeah. And I'm glad you were able to work through that. I wanted to comment on something that Jess posted here about, she was interested in these substances, but was afraid of what might come up, right? And so that is a prime example, right, of something that might come up that you don't know what to do with. And that is why doing a lot of preparation work and working with a facilitator and or a coach to help you process. Again, that it's very common because in our society, we put on a pedestal into like hyper independence. And really, these compounds are showing you that we are all one and we are all connected in some way. And so we shouldn't have these big experiences and then go isolate. That's not going to help us understand what happened or resolve what happened, right? A lot of us, especially if we're working through trauma, for example, the majority of people, trauma was inflicted by a person or by a people. And so the only way that you can overcome some of that is in relation to people, right? And it's not necessarily in relation to the people that caused you trauma. But again, these are relational dynamics, and you need to be able to work through them, not alone. And so when I hear people say, I'm afraid of what's going to come up, the first thing that I say is that's information. And you need to be able to work with that information. It doesn't mean you shouldn't be doing these compounds, but it means like if you're afraid of what's going to come up, then you need to pause for a beat and think about what are you afraid of, right? And then start kind of going down that path of working with someone to help you figure out what could you potentially be afraid of, and then how can we create a support system for you. So if something comes up, you're prepared to deal with it, right? One of the stories that she ended up getting better on her own, and it took a long time. And again, it's one of these things that people tell me all the time. I wish if I had known more, if I had found you first, things would have been differently. But she went to Costa Rica to work with a therapist with mushrooms, because in Costa Rica, it's very gray and it's work that's done in the open. And she thought, well, this person has training. She's a therapist. She has training. That will be the safest for me. And she didn't know enough how to interview the person she was going to sit with to realize this person was not very experienced. And she went and sat with her. And afterwards, she felt very depressed. She was having delusions of grandeur, and she was like thinking she was God and she started to worry because these weren't thoughts she had ever had before. Right. And she tried to connect with this therapist. The therapist kind of ghosted her because the therapist wasn't experienced enough to know how to help this woman. And so this woman just said, okay, I'm never doing these substances again. I need to like sit at home and journal and figure out what's wrong with me and go down a research path. And eventually it was time, right? Time was the biggest thing that helped her. And luckily she had enough of a support system that, again, she didn't go down a dark path that could have ended very differently. But once we met each other, she said, had I known there was a community that I could come talk to, had I known that I had another way to find resources, things would have been I don't think I would have freaked out as much. I think I would have been able to just handle the whole situation differently.
Certainly. It does look like we have a requested guest up here. We've got Jess Told You So. Let's bring her up and let her ask her question or talk about her experience. Hello there, Jess. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Uncle Wolf.
Good to see you out here.
So my thing is, I've wanted to dabble in it just because I've got a lot of unresolved things from my past. I had a very, very dark childhood, and I don't talk about it a lot. And the things that I'm scared that'll come out are the things that I've mentally blocked out, and then that's kind of what scares me about it. Is if I can remember some things that were awful, what am I not remembering?
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense.
Absolutely.
Have you ever had anybody come out of it like really messed up because of the things that were revealed?
Sure. Right. This is a risk of what can happen. And it's really important that you know that, because that is your informed consent, right? Of you deciding, do I want to even attempt? Because this could happen. It could not happen. I will give you one story of a woman who I know who basically was raised in Europe in basically in a cult that she left when she was 16 and had to leave her family behind and everything. She started down this path and has used indigenous healers and has done different medicines. And she thought the same thing, right? I don't have a lot of memories from my childhood. I know it was traumatic. I know to leave that situation was traumatic, and I'm kind of worried what is going to come up. And again, this is just one story from one person. And she has been able to create a relationship with her parents now, speaks to her family again. She feels healed, and she still has no memory from her teenage and childhood years. And the indigenous healer that she works with basically said to her, it doesn't matter. Remembering what happened to you doesn't matter. It's how are you working through it now? How are you dealing with the feelings that come up now? How are you living now? How are you finding peace now? She might never recover those memories. And that could just be her psyche protecting herself, right? That's one example. I do know somebody, unfortunately, who was exploited as a kid by family members in a very not okay way. And doing this work was very hard for her. Very hard for her, and it's impacted her life, and she's remembered more of what happened. But because she's had support systems in therapists, right? Because it's not just, again, about working with the medicine can show you things, they can show you what you need to heal, right? But they won't do the healing for you. So she knew going into this that she remembered things that were not good, and she, like you, figured there's probably stuff that's deeper. So she made sure she had people on the other end that had worked with cases like hers before and knew how to support her and knew how to help her, integrate and sort of normalize her life today.
Do you help set people up with people around them that can guide them through that process?
I do.
Okay. I think that's what I need, because I feel like right now I'm going through the motions of life, mm-hmm. and kind of digressing mentally and kind of going into a shell, basically, instead of that outgoing, outspoken person that I've always been. And that's what kind of put me into I kind of was looking into psilocybin first,
yeah,
and kind of doing some research on that, but kind of stopped because it's one of those things that you need to be in a safe environment. And you don't know who you can trust, and people can charm you in every way possible, and, that kind of stuff. So I'm really, really glad that I caught this episode.
Well, and I honor and appreciate the fact that you've been doing your research, because I think, again, this is what's going to keep you safe. Yeah. And it's what's going to allow you to have that informed consent. The more you know, the more you're going to be able to make a decision. One thing we haven't talked about on this episode, which has probably come across many people's purview recently, is microdosing. It's very trendy. And microdosing, we don't have a lot of time to talk about it, but microdosing is a subperceptual amount, usually of either Lucy or magic mushrooms. Those are the two most common substances that people use. And microdosing it's not going to mirror this kind of macro experience we've been talking about, right? This idea of dying or seeing aliens or overcoming fears of death, right? They're not the same by any means. But what microdosing allows for people, especially Jess, someone like you who might feel like you might face things that will come up that you don't know if you're ready, microdosing allows you to start, one, building a relationship with these compounds so that you can start to understand how you feel on them. Mm-hmm. They can kind of bring some emotions back online. And instead of tipping you into the overwhelm, it can kind of give you a taste, right? You might find yourself crying at the grocery store, which maybe isn't ideal, but it starts to help you get in touch without completely dysregulating you. And therefore, you can step into a larger journey sometimes if you've experienced the effects of microdosing first.
Okay, so I followed you, and I'm super excited to start this journey and learn more about it. And I appreciate you bringing me up and everything. But you've answered everything for me so far, especially through the episode.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Jess, for your question. I'll go ahead and drop you back down. I did see that we had another question from Sage Smith. She asked, have you ever seen any beautiful lights or pink lights while taking any psychedelics?
Yeah, I've seen all the lights.
All the lights, yeah. You know what? They're this color right there. Those neon wow colors. Yes. Have you ever seen the grid in the sky?
Not that specifically, but yes, I have seen things that I guess, like you said, people describe them as ancient languages or sacred geometry or, these cave sketchings, right? I see so many of that stuff. Absolutely.
And as the clock ticks on, the echoes of our conversation still linger in the dark. Tonight we've wandered through the hidden corridors of the mind, places lit not by sunlight, but by the flicker of imagination, memory, and mystery. We've spoken of psychedelics, consciousness, the spirit world, and the thin veil that separates waking life from the dream. My deepest thanks to our guest, Linden Schaffer, for guiding us through that strange and beautiful terrain, and to all of you, the wanderers, the seekers, the ones who never stop asking what lies beyond the edge of what we're told is real. Remember, the truth may not always be found in the night or in the light. Sometimes it waits quietly in the dark for those brave enough to look. Until next time, keep your minds open, your lights low, and your curiosity alive. I'm Mr. Wolf, and you've been listening to Wolf Radio Live, TikTok's home for the unexplained. Thank you very much, Linden. We've had a great time having you here today, and I appreciate everything that you've brought to the table today. For those of you trying to connect with Linden, you can find her at revealcommunity.world or here on TikTok at Reveal Community. Thank you, folks. Have a great day, and we'll catch you on the same Wolf time at the same Wolf channel every Wednesday and Saturday evening at 8 p.m. Central Standard Time. You guys have a great evening. Thank you for being here.